This video is about the Lowthers of Wilton Castle, where they came from and where they went after they sold up. It completes a little series about Wilton, Lazenby, Lackenby, Kirkleatham and Eston Mines. It started with these two. This Lowther family were a branch of the Lowthers of the Lowther estate near Penrith, and they lived at Swillington Hall, a huge estate just outside Wakefield. And this lady here, Lady Elizabeth Fern, the wife of Sir John Lowther, she bought Wilton Estate for her son in 1806. There was the remains of a medieval castle there, but that was all swept away and a new castle was built in 1810 to a design by a chap called Sir Robert Stirk. And this is a lithograph of the said Swillington Hall estate. It looks as if it's 17th century. They always did it, whenever they did these for books, it was always rather grand. Sort of orchards and big gardens, and as you can see there. And this is a little bit about it underneath. That William Lowther there, he had inherited it from one of the Lowther family, I think it was the Earl of Lonsdale, who lived near Penrith, who died without children. And you can see there it was sold by Charles Bingham Lowther. So this was a fortunate gentleman who had Wilton Castle built for him. But he never married, this fella. But he was very, very lucky, because in 1839, which was only, 30 years after the castle was built, a huge layer of ironstone was found under the estate. Millions and millions of tons of the stuff, like a great thick layer right through the estate. I mean, in some places it was 12 feet thick, and of course made them a fortune. On top of the fortune that had been made at Swillington Hall, because this estate was built on a coal field. So between coal and iron ore, they made vast sums of money. When he died, of course, he had no offspring. This fella died very young, and so the estate passed to his brother, Sir Charles Hugh Lowther. So John Henry Lowther, whose mother had this Wilton Castle built for him, was obviously quite enamoured with the place. He's reputed to have written this little poem or piece of prose about the castle. It isn't in his handwriting, it's in mine. It all changed when ironstone was found on the estate. Now he was very unfortunate, this fellow, because when he was a youngster, when he was an infant, he had scarlet fever and went blind. And his mother, Lady Elizabeth Fern, she brought into the country embossed books, especially for the blind. It's probably the first time they'd ever come into this country. They weren't Braille, they were a sort of precursor to Braille. It was developed by a fellow called William Moon, who developed this sort of moon embossing, or moon type as it was called. So with all this money that was being made from ironstone mining, this chap spent a huge amount of money developing the estate. The east wing of Wilton Castle at that time was just a facade. It made the place look really big when you looked at it from the north or south, but there wasn't much substance to it. So he knocked it down and rebuilt it with a rather grand ballroom and library. And you can see his initials, C.H. Lowther, C.H.L, on the top of the drain pipes on the east wing of Wilton Castle. He also rebuilt the village, Wilton Village, away from the castle to the site where it is now. Not that it's very far from the castle anyway. The church was completely revamped and has a different appearance to how it was. And the road which ran across to the north of the castle, the sort of main road as it was in those days, he moved it further to the north and built a great big sandstone wall, which is still there, right away along the side of the road, planted trees behind it so that the castle was obscured. You couldn't actually see it from the road. He also spent money helping to develop ways of reading for the blind. He spent money on this, developing this moon type. It's still in use today for those who find Braille very difficult. Moon type is still in use. It's very, very simple. And being blind, of course, he won't have been able to see any of these changes to the castle, the village, or indeed the farms, which were also all rebuilt, which must have been rather strange. This is the north front of Wilton Castle after its renovation by Charles Hugh Lowther. This is the east wing, which he had built, which includes a large ballroom. Or did do, doesn't now. It's now divided into apartments, this ballroom, rather grandly. And on this end there's an arch over the drive which goes down to the golf course, which was built by ICI, on which there is the Lowther coat of arms, and they're still there. But it has a little sort of clenched hand in the middle of it, which obviously has some significance. But it's a grand spot, especially when it was all yours. And that's the said coat of arms in simplified form. Normally it's got all sorts of fancy frills around it, but that's it in its basic form. And on the Wilton one there's a hand here, a little sort of clenched hand here. Unfortunately I don't have a photograph of it. I should really go and get one. Oh, Sir Charles Hugh Lowther and his wife Isabella Moorhead, they had 3 children. Elizabeth, Frances Elizabeth, she died in 1918, and this fella, George William Lowther, and the younger son was James. Now, Charles Hugh Lowther died in 1894, but his eldest son died before him in 1890, unfortunately for him. So the estate passed to his brother, his younger brother James. who lived at Wilton Castle and took a great interest in the estate. And he is buried in Wilton churchyard. He died in 1904. But he was never married. And this is the man himself, Jim Lowther, who left the castle to Colonel John George, his nephew, posing rather grandly, although looks quite stern. He's obviously signed that photograph. Here's a caricature of the same man, which, as it says there, appeared in Vanity Fair. So he was obviously well known on the social circuit. A bit of a lad by all accounts. And this is just a little bit more about James Lowther. When the village was rebuilt, moved away from the castle and rebuilt in its present position by Charles Hugh Lowther, the chap who was blind, a school was built there for children of the parish, which included Lackenby, Lazenby and Dunsdale. And on the end wall of the school was and is still a large leaded window, and around the window are reputedly the Lowther racing colours, which are blue and gold, and they go all the way around. Not just one paint, I think there are about 3 paints right across. The school closed in the 1930s, and the children went down to the school in Lazenby. And then when ICI took it over, this building became the joiner's workshop for the whole estate. But eventually it was sold off and converted into a private dwelling. And they have kept this window. In fact, they've completely renovated it at a great cost. And those panes are still there. Those lights, those golden blue lights around the outside, are still there. So a little of the Lowther history remains. So this is Jim Lowther's, or James Lowther's, grave in Wilton churchyard. I think he's the only Lowther who's buried there. He was in fact cremated. It goes on to tell you a little bit about where he was a Member of Parliament, but we'll have to forego that. And together with the young Turners, the young Zetlands, the Duncombe and the various aristocratic offspring in the area, their main interests were racing, hunting, shooting and gambling. Sort of a pack of rakes, really. And he took to breeding racehorses in the 1870s. About 1873 I think he started off. Probably in competition with the with the Turners and their descendants, although the Turners had far more success with the Derby winner and numerous other big race winners. And in 1903, when he was obviously ill, he had to pack it all in. But like most of these families, the career paths seem to be public school, Eton, Westminster or St Paul's seem to be the favoured ones in London, followed by university and then a career in the army. Usually some cavalry regiment because of their great interest in horses. And then when their army career was coming to an end, they all seemed to enter politics. For the most part, they were do-gooders. There's no two ways about it. They spent a great deal of time, if not money, doing worthy things and held high office in government. So when he died, unmarried and without children, Wilton Castle was passed to his brother's youngest son. He left him it. His brother had 1, 2, 3, 4. His first 4 children were daughters. And of course women didn't figure in all this business at all. They had to find themselves a rich husband. They didn't inherit any of the estate at all. Sir Charles Bingham Lowther, on the death of his father, he had inherited Swillington Hall, this huge house sitting on this coalfield in Wakefield. So it passed to Colonel John George Lowther in 1904. He had been brought up at Swillington Hall, and I suspect much of the money from the iron ore and coalfield had been invested in property in Northamptonshire, because that's ultimately where they ended up. So basically the Wilton Castle estate and the Swillington Hall estate became sort of cash cows, if you like, providing money for investment further south, which we'll look at later. In 1911, Colonel John George married this lady, Lila Charlotte Sarah White, and we'll look at her, where she came from, later on. But in the 1940s, during the war, it became obvious that the iron ore on Wilton Estate was running out. The whole of the south of the estate had been ravaged by drift mines, and there was masses of subsidence, and it was all in a bit of a mess. But with the lease running out in 1949, the 99-year lease was up, it was realised that rather than making money, this estate was going to be an absorber of money, and it needed a fair amount of spending on it. Very little had been done to the castle or the village. They all had dry toilets and so on. The Lowther family spent less and less time at Wilton Castle. They were very rarely seen there. They used to come up for the races. They used to come up for red car races and Stockton races, and they were often seen driving down there 4 in hand, a sort of coach and 4 horses. But most of the time they spent down south, in and around Northamptonshire. So ICI, huge chemical company, they were looking for a large flat site with a deep water port, and of course they didn't really want to be negotiating with masses of small farmers when along came this big estate for sale. They didn't really want the ravaged south side of the estate. I don't think they were particularly keen on having the castle in the village either. But eventually they were persuaded to buy the lot. So ICI bought the whole of the south side of the estate, from the main road, which had been moved, down to the river and the river access. They paid £123,820 for it, which ICI thought was an absolute bargain. But to get it, they had to buy the castle, the village, the parkland, and all this ravaged and seemingly worthless land to the south, which wasn't flat at all. It was very, very hilly. And for the castle, the farms on that side, I think there were about 4 of them, over 1,000 acres of land. The village, they paid £66,197, which in today's money seems peanuts. But it did need a lot of money spending on it, and ICI did spend much money completely revamping the castle, and the village for that matter. But of course ICI lost their way, to put it mildly, and found themselves in desperate straits financially, and they were selling off their assets hand over fist, but to no avail. And eventually they had to sell it. They sold the whole of the chemical plant which had been built on this flat site, which was enormous and worth a fortune. They had to sell all that off. And then, much to everybody's amazement, the whole estate was sold off in 1999. The castle, the village, the woodland, the farms, the whole estate was broken up into lots and sold off. If you look at the video on the Wilton Castle, you will see there the catalogue and what they were expecting to get for it all. And so this whole era, Lowther ICI era, it just came to an end all of a sudden. And Wimpey's bought the castle and converted it all into rather smart apartments on a 999-year lease. There isn't any ground rent, but I think it's about £5,000 a year maintenance charge. So this fella, Colonel John George's elder brother, after he sold Swillington Hall, he moved down to Thornby Hall, which again is in Northamptonshire. And then eventually they moved to Irbystock Hall in Denbighshire near Wrexham, where they still are. That branch of the family are still there. This is Lila Charlotte Sarah White, who was born in 1889, and she was a lady who married Colonel John George Lowther of Wilton Castle in 1911. Now, what we'll look at next is where she came from. Well, this is obviously going to take longer than I thought, so this is the end of part 1.